Imagine like a massive corporate merger.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, picture two absolute titans of industry, right? Companies that have been fiercely competing for, I mean, a solid decade.
Right.
Bleeding each other dry, stealing clients, launching these aggressive marketing wars.
Just total cutthroat behavior.
Exactly. And then, finally, the two CEOs stand together on this brightly lit stage. They shake hands, they smile for the cameras, and they sign this beautifully bound 50-page document declaring, a new era of synergy and mutual prosperity.
And the stock prices just surge.
Oh, completely. Everyone breathes a massive sigh of relief. But here's the thing. The absolute second the cameras turn off, both of those CEOs walk straight back to their respective boardrooms.
Yeah.
And they immediately instruct their executive teams to actively sabotage the other side.
Wow. So it's all fake.
Completely. They start poaching top talent. They set up these shady shell companies to undercut pricing. And they basically plot a hostile takeover.
That's incredibly cynical.
Right. The whole public spectacle was just a complete illusion. It was a paper piece.
Yeah, a fragile facade, really. Built entirely on mutual exhaustion rather than, genuine reconciliation. Both sides just desperately needed a moment to reload their weapons.
Exactly. And that exact corporate sabotage dynamic that perfectly describes one of the most spectacular political failures in all of human history. Because today, on the deep dive, we are talking about the year 421 BC. We are stepping right into the muddy, chaotic waters of ancient Greece.
The Peloponnesian War.
Yes. Two superpowers, Athens and Sparta, locked in this devastating war for 10 years. And they finally sign a 50-year treaty called the Peace of Nicias.
50 years, that's quite optimistic.
Very optimistic. Because on paper, it looks flawless.
Yeah.
But in reality, it was a total disaster that barely lasted 5 years before basically plunging the entire Greek world into an even more catastrophic bloodbath.
Right. And what makes the specific moment in history so compelling for us to look at is that we have two wildly different but incredibly brilliant ancient writers documenting this exact train wreck in real time.
Yeah, the sources for this are just amazing.
They really are. You have Thucydides, who is this disgraced, exiled Athenian general.
Right.
And he writes with this cold, clinical, surgically precise realism. He basically gives us the ultimate insider's geopolitical autopsy.
And the military mind at work.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, right in the same city, you have Aristophanes.
The playwright.
Yes. Staging these biting, absurdist, just hysterical comedies right in the heart of Athens, while the war is literally still raging outside the walls.
It's so crazy to think about. It's like the ultimate realist sitting right next to the ultimate satirist.
Right.
And they are both diagnosing the exact same terminal illness of human ambition. But here's the thing, and this is the core mission of what we are doing today. We aren't just here to dissect a 2,400-year-old political failure just, for the sake of a history lesson.
Right, there's a much deeper layer here.
Exactly. We are taking this spectacular collapse of human ingenuity, and we're holding it up against the light of biblical theology.
Yeah.
We're going to pull in the Old Testament prophets, guys like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, because they diagnosed this exact structural rot centuries earlier.
They saw it coming a mile away.
They really did. And we're going to look at the surgical precision of the Apostle James, the theology of Paul, and even early church fathers like Augustine and Chrysostom.
Because the Greeks, they perfectly mapped out the disease of the human heart, right?
Oh, yeah.
But they had absolutely no cure. They could show you the broken bone on the x-ray, but they couldn't set it.
That's a great way to put it. So today, we're asking for you, the listener. How does understanding this ancient failure of human peace actually deepen our Christian faith?
Yeah.
How does it inspire us to love Christ more deeply and honestly equip us to live out true, enduring peace in our own daily lives?
It's a profound contrast, really. The ancient world gives us the diagnosis, but the gospel gives us the great physician.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the mechanics of this merger gone wrong. To understand why human political solutions constantly fail, we really have to look at the structural reality of the Peace of Nicias itself.
Right.
So set the stage for us. It's 421 BC. Athens and Sparta are the two undisputed heavyweights of the age.
And they are completely, utterly exhausted.
Yeah.
The Peloponnesian War up to this point hasn't been, a quick, decisive series of battles. It's been a full decade of grinding attrition.
Right. Grinding is the perfect word.
It really is. The psychological toll on both of these cities was just immense. I mean, Athens had this strategy, which was initially devised by Pericles, to pull all their citizens behind these massive long walls.
These walls connected the city to their port, right?
Yeah.
Piraeus.
Exactly. They relied on their dominant navy to supply them with food from overseas, while the Spartan infantry just ravaged the surrounding farmland of Attica every single year.
Just burn their crops.
Yep. Packing tens of thousands of people into this cramped, highly unsanitary space, it led to a devastating plague. Oh, the plague of Athens.
It was horrific. It wiped out perhaps a third of the entire Athenian population,
Wow.
including Pericles himself. So the trauma of that was still incredibly fresh.
And militarily, Athens had recently suffered some brutal setbacks, too.
Yeah, they did.
They took a massive hit at the Battle of Delium. Their hoplites were totally routed by the Boeotians, who were a Spartan ally. And then there was Amphipolis. This was a really crucial colony up north in Thrace.
Very crucial.
Yeah, it provided Athens with the timber they needed for their ships, and it gave them access to gold and silver mines. And a brilliant Spartan general named Brasidas actually managed to capture it.
Which was a devastating economic and strategic blow to the Athenian Empire.
Huge. And in fact, Thucydides, our clinical historian, he was the actual Athenian commander tasked with saving Amphipolis.
Which is such a wild detail.
It is. He arrived too late to save the city, and the Athenian assembly was so furious with him that they exiled him for 20 years. Which is an incredible twist of fate, really. Because that exact exile is what allowed Thucydides to travel around, interview people on both sides of the conflict, and write his historical masterpiece.
So his failure gave us the history.
Basically, yeah. But you mentioned Sparta. We can't forget that Sparta was equally desperate for a pause in the fighting.
Right, they weren't exactly winning either.
No, because Sparta's entire society was built on a really precarious foundation. It was built on the subjugation of this massive enslaved population known as the Helots.
Right, the Spartan citizens were actually a huge minority.
Exactly. The Spartan elite, the Spartiates, were vastly outnumbered by these Helots, and their greatest fear, always, was a Helot revolt.
And Athens had brilliantly exploited that fear, right?
They did. A few years prior to the peace, the Athenians had managed to trap and capture about 120 elite Spartan soldiers on a tiny island called Sphacteria.
Right off the coast of the Peloponnese.
Exactly. Now, to us today, 120 guys doesn't sound like a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like a small skirmish.
But the Spartiate population was tiny to begin with. These were the sons of the leading families of Sparta.
Oh, wow.
Athens basically had the Spartan aristocracy locked in a cage, and they were threatening to execute them if Sparta ever invaded Attica again.
That is massive leverage.
It completely paralyzed Spartan strategy. Add to that, Sparta had a 30-year peace treaty with another really powerful Greek city-state, Argos.
And that treaty was expiring.
Yes, and the Spartans were terrified of having to fight a two-front war against Athens on one side and a newly hostile Argos on the other.
So you have these two empires. One is reeling from a plague and the loss of its northern economic lifeline.
Right.
And the other is terrified of a slave revolt and desperate to get his elite sons back.
That is the soil in which the Peace of Nicias is planted.
Yeah.
It wasn't a moral awakening. It wasn't some sudden realization of the brotherhood of man. It was just sheer, desperate self-interest.
And the terms they negotiated totally reflect that desperation. Nicias, who is this highly respected, very conservative Athenian general, and Pleistoanax, the Spartan king, they hammer out this incredibly ambitious document.
Which was supposed to be a 50-year truce.
50 years. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah.
The core terms were simple, but they were painful. Basically, everyone hits the reset button.
A return to the status quo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Status quo ante bellum. Sparta has to give back Amphipolis and those other northern territories. And Athens has to give back Pylos, which was this incredibly strategic fort they had captured right on Spartan territory. And, of course, they have to return the 120 elite hostages from Sphacteria.
Right. And they swore solemn oaths. They poured libations to the gods. They even signed a defensive alliance with each other.
Which Thucydides copies exactly into his history.
He does. He copies the exact text of the treaty, dating it meticulously by the names of the magistrates in both cities. It looks totally ironclad.
But the iron was brittle from the moment it cooled.
Very brittle. Because a treaty only works if the signatories actually have the power and the moral courage to enforce it on their own people and their allies.
Right.
And this is where your corporate sabotage analogy is just perfect. Sparta signed the treaty, but Sparta was the head of the Peloponnesian League.
And their allies were not happy.
No, its major allies, cities like Corinth, Thebes, Megara, they were absolutely furious.
Why?
Because they felt Sparta had completely sold them out just to get 120 rich kids back. Corinth had basically started this whole war because of Athenian economic imperialism, and the treaty did absolutely nothing to curb Athenian power.
Oh, wow. So they felt totally betrayed.
Exactly. So the allies flat out refused to ratify the treaty.
And Sparta, incredibly, just shrugs its shoulders.
Yeah, they either couldn't or wouldn't force their own allies to comply. The Spartan commander up in Amphipolis straight up refuses to hand the city back to Athens.
And in retaliation, Athens says, well, if you aren't giving back Amphipolis, we aren't evacuating Pylos. I mean, they do give back the hostages, but they keep the dagger pointed right at Sparta's throat. It is just a cascading failure of compliance.
It really reveals the fatal flaw of human political machinations. The leaders on both sides maintain this incredibly thin, polite facade of compliance.
Sending envoys back and forth.
Stuck in public statements, exactly. But all the while, they are actively plotting against each other through proxies. They refuse to let the peace hold because they were driven by alliance pressures, fear of losing face, and just the inherent gravitational pull of power.
Which brings us to the key players who are orchestrating this collapse, because they serve as perfect moral case studies for how leadership fails.
They really do.
Let's look at Nicias,
Yeah.
the man whose name is literally on the treaty. If you were building a profile for a stable, trustworthy CEO, Nicias checks all the boxes.
Every single one.
He is incredibly wealthy, he's cautious, he's conservative, and he is deeply traditionally pious. He genuinely seems to care about the stability of Athens.
He is the total embodiment of the traditional Athenian establishment. But his tragedy, and it really is a profound tragedy, is that his virtues were entirely inadequate for the crisis he was in.
Right.
He negotiated the peace, but he completely lacked the visionary boldness or the political ruthlessness required to actually enforce it.
He was too passive.
Yeah, he was a decent, cautious man trying to hold back a tidal wave of imperial ambition with a broom.
That's a great image. And riding that tidal wave is a guy named Alcibiades.
Oh, Alcibiades.
If Nicias is the cautious, old-school CEO, Alcibiades is the rogue, hotshot vice president who wants to take over the company and doesn't care if he burns the whole building down to do it.
That is the perfect description.
He is young, brilliantly intelligent, incredibly good-looking, fabulously wealthy, and utterly devoid of any moral scruples.
None whatsoever.
He was raised in the house of Pericles, educated by Socrates, and just driven by this insatiable hunger for personal glory.
And Alcibiades sees the Peace of Nicias not as a triumph for his city, but as a personal insult.
Because he wasn't the one who negotiated it.
Partly, yeah. The Spartans had negotiated it through Nicias rather than his own family, which had historically handled Spartan relations. So, the moment the ink is dry, Alcibiades begins systematically dismantling the treaty.
How does he do it?
He brilliantly and very deceitfully maneuvers Athens into a new alliance with Argos, Mantinea, and Elis.
Which are cities in the Peloponnese.
Democratic cities right in Sparta's backyard.
Oh, wow.
This is a direct provocation. It undercuts the entire spirit of the Peace of Nicias, and it leads directly to the massive Battle of Mantinea in 418 BC.
Where Sparta barely manages to crush the coalition and reassert its dominance.
Right.
The audacity of Alcibiades is just staggering. I mean, he essentially engineers a massive land war against Sparta, while Athens is still technically at peace with Sparta.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
But what amazes me is how the Athenian people react. You'd think they would punish Alcibiades for dragging them right back into the meat grinder.
You would think so.
But instead, they are hypnotized by him.
Yeah.
He tells them exactly what they want to hear. He tells them they are destined to rule the world.
Which sets up the ultimate catastrophe, the Sicilian expedition.
Yes.
This is really the climax of Thucydides' tragic narrative. It's 415 BC. The Peace of Nicias is basically a joke at this point, though it technically still exists on paper.
Right.
And an embassy arrives from a small city in Sicily asking Athens for help against Syracuse, which was the dominant power on the island.
And Alcibiades sees the ultimate opportunity.
He does. He stands up in the assembly and proposes sending a massive armada to conquer Sicily.
Which is insane.
It is. He wraps this insane imperial overreach in the glittering language of manifest destiny. He argues that an empire must constantly expand or it will stagnate and die.
Wait, if Nicias was the pious, cautious one, how did he end up leading the biggest military disaster in Athenian history?
That is the tragic irony of it all. Nicias, to his credit, sees exactly how suicidal this plan is. He stands up in the assembly right after Alcibiades and gives a perfectly reasoned, very cautious speech. He basically tells them, look, we are still recovering from the plague. We haven't even secured our own backyard against Sparta. Going 1,000 miles away to conquer a massive island we know nothing about is total madness.
Which makes perfect sense.
It does. And then he tries to use reverse psychology.
Oh, this is the worst part.
It really is. He says, listen, if we go, we can't just send a few ships. We have to send the biggest, most expensive fleet in human history. He assumes the Goths will shock the assembly into saying no.
But the reverse psychology spectacularly backfires.
Spectacularly. The assembly, who are already whipped into a frenzy of greed and ambition by Alcibiades, they hear Nicias outline this massive fleet required, and they just say, great idea, we'll vote for that.
Wow.
The lust for prestige, what the Greeks called pleonexia, the greed for amorapenk, it completely overrides their rational judgment.
And then, in perhaps the cruelest twist of ancient history, the assembly votes to make Nicias one of the supreme commanders of the expedition.
It is unbelievable. They force the guy who just spent an hour explaining exactly why the plan will destroy the empire. They force him to be the CEO of the hostile takeover.
And Nicias goes along with it. He could have resigned. He could have just refused.
He could have. But he is terrified of being accused of cowardice or treason by the mob. He is utterly paralyzed by his fear of the crowd.
Exactly.
So Nicias is forced to lead an expedition he believes is doomed, alongside Alcibiades. But then Alcibiades is accused of a religious crime back home and defects to Sparta to save his own skin.
He just abandons them.
Yep. So Nicias is left totally alone. He's sick with a terrible kidney disease, leading this massive armada. And his very caution, his traditional piety, becomes the actual instrument of his destruction.
So fast forward a couple of years. The siege of Syracuse has totally failed.
Yes.
The Athenian fleet is trapped in the harbor. Nicias finally realizes they have to retreat overland to save the army. They are packing up to leave under the cover of darkness. And then a lunar eclipse happens.
This is the moment that just makes you want to scream at the history book.
It truly is.
Nicias, being deeply superstitious, he consults the soothsayers. And they tell him the gods require the army to stay exactly where they are for thrice 9 days, 27 days.
And Nicias, the cautious, pious general, obeys.
He obeys. And that delay seals their fate. It gives the Syracusans and their newly arrived Spartan allies all the time they need to block the roads and completely destroy the Athenian fleet.
The entire Athenian expeditionary force, tens of thousands of men, the absolute pride of the empire, they are slaughtered or captured.
It's devastating.
When you look at Nicias, it's such a haunting warning for anyone in a leadership role today. You know, whether you are managing a department at work, leading a church, or just raising a family, you can be the most pious, cautious, morally decent person in the room. You can clearly see the disastrous cliff the organization is running toward. But if you are terrified of looking weak, if you are paralyzed by what the crowd thinks of you, and if you lack the moral courage to bear the cost of principled dissent, you will end up signing off on your own Sicilian expedition.
That is so true.
You will be swept into the catastrophe right alongside everyone else. It shows us that human virtues like caution, piety, loyalty, if they are unanchored from divine wisdom and true moral courage, they are completely insufficient to stop the momentum of human sin.
And that is the precise diagnosis Thucydides wants us to walk away with. He forces us to look at the cold mechanics of failure.
Right, moving from the history to the way it was recorded.
Exactly. Let's really examine Thucydides' methodology here. He didn't just want to write a thrilling narrative of battles and speeches just to entertain the aristocracy.
Like Herodotus, maybe.
Right. He explicitly rejected the style of writers like Herodotus, who constantly wove gods and myths into their histories. Thucydides wanted to isolate the variables of human behavior.
He called it a possession for all time, right?
Yes, ekatoma si. He believed that human nature, what the Greeks called physis, is a constant. He believed that under the extreme pressure of war and fear, the thin veneer of civilization, the social conventions, is stripped away.
And when you strip away the polite fiction of treaties like the Peace of Nicias, what is actually left?
Raw, mechanical, calculating self-interest.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's pure, unfiltered realism. He views geopolitics almost like physics.
Yes, exactly like physics.
Power abhors a vacuum. The strong will naturally expand until they hit an immovable object. And the absolute peak of this clinical, terrifying worldview is found in Book 5 of his history, in a passage known as the Melian Dialogue.
The very famous passage.
Arguably the most famous piece of political philosophy from the ancient world. and it happens right before the Sicilian expedition. Set the stage for us.
Okay, so it's 416 BC, during the supposed peace. Athens sends a massive fleet to the tiny, fiercely independent island of Melos.
Just a little island.
Very small. Melos had Spartan heritage, but they had remained strictly neutral in the war. They just wanted to be left alone to farm their rocky island.
Fair enough.
Right. So the Athenians land, and they send envoys to the Melian magistrates. Thucydides reconstructs the debate, and it is chilling because the Athenians immediately strip away all diplomatic pleasantries.
No small talk.
None. They tell the Melians, look, we aren't going to waste time talking about justice or how we defeated the Persians or any moral right we have to rule. You know as well as we do that right as the world goes is only in question between equals in power.
And the famous line is, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Exactly.
The Athenians are basically saying, justice is a fairy tale we tell children. The only law of the universe is gravity, and we are the gravity.
Submit to our empire, pay us tribute, or we will slaughter you.
And the Melians desperately try to argue back, right?
They do. They say, if you destroy us without provocation, you will terrify all the other neutral states, and they will ally against you.
The Athenians say.
We'll take that risk.
Yeah.
So then the Melians say, well, the gods will favor us because we are standing for justice against injustice.
And the Athenians reply, we believe that the gods, by a law of their nature, rule wherever they can. We didn't invent this law. We are just applying it.
It's just staggering arrogance. Finally, the Melians say, the Spartans will come save us because we are their kin.
And the Athenians mock them. They point out that Sparta acts entirely out of self-interest and will never risk their precious fleet for a tiny island.
And the truly tragic part is the Athenians were absolutely right about the Spartans.
Sparta didn't lift a finger.
Not one finger. The Melians refuse to submit. The Athenians lay siege, and when the island finally falls, the Athenians execute every single adult male and sell all the women and children into slavery.
It is genocide, executed with bureaucratic efficiency.
Yes. But this is where the structural genius of Thucydides really shines. Because he doesn't editorialize, he doesn't write a paragraph saying, and the Athenians were very evil for doing this.
He doesn't need to.
No, he doesn't have to. Because of where he places the Melian dialogue in the architecture of his book. He places the supreme, unapologetic statement of Athenian arrogance right at the very end of Book 5.
And then you turn the page to Book 6, and what begins?
The Sicilian expedition.
The hubris is immediately followed by the nemesis.
Precisely. Thucydides juxtaposes the moment Athens claims to be a godlike force of nature with the very moment they are utterly humiliated and destroyed in the dirt of Sicily. The structure of the text does the judging for him.
I want to dive into something absolutely fascinating here, because looking at the original Greek text reveals a level of literary mastery that is just mind-blowing.
Oh, the linguistics.
Yes. Let's talk about the linguistic shift Thucydides uses. Think about a modern sports broadcast, okay? When a team is on a massive winning streak, destroying everyone, the commentators speak in the present tense.
Right. They are crushing it.
They are dominating the paint. Nobody can stop them. It implies an ongoing, unstoppable reality. But if the star quarterback suddenly snaps his leg and the team loses by 50 points, the commentator's voice drops and they shift to the definitive past tense.
It was a disaster.
The season ended tonight. Exactly.
And that is exactly what Thucydides does using Greek grammar. Systemic functional linguistics, SFL analysis of the text shows this beautifully.
How does it work in the Greek?
Well, in the Melian dialogue, when the Athenians are asserting that the strong rule the weak, Thucydides writes their dialogue heavily in the present imperfective aspect.
Okay.
In Greek, the imperfective conveys ongoing, continuous, or habitual action. The Athenians speak as if their power is an eternal, unchanging condition of the cosmos. We are ruling, we are dominating.
But then, when Thucydides narrates the destruction of the Athenian army retreating from Syracuse, the grammar radically shifts.
Completely.
Yeah.
He shifts into the aorist perfective aspect.
And what does that convey?
The aorist tense in Greek conveys absolute completeness, finality, a single-bounded event. When he describes the Athenian soldiers dying of thirst, trampling each other in the river, being butchered by the Syracusan cavalry, and the survivors being herded into the stone quarries, the verbs are stark and final.
Wow.
The ongoing, arrogant reality of the empire is shattered by the absolute finality of their destruction. It is a masterpiece of syntactical irony.
It reads like a surgeon's clinical notes on a terminal patient. His restraint makes the horror hit so much harder.
It really does.
He describes those survivors in the quarries of Syracuse. The pride of Athens, the men who just claimed to rule the world, they are crammed into these deep, open-air stone pits.
Baking in the blazing Sicilian sun during the day, freezing at night.
They are given a half pint of water and a pint of grain a day. They're dying of untreated wounds and dysentery, and the bodies are just piling up on top of each other. The smell, the misery, it is an absolute catastrophic waste of human potential.
Which forces us right now to ask, how do we interpret this biblically?
Right.
Because Thucydides rejected divine intervention. He thought the destruction in Sicily was just a mathematical certainty. Athens overexpended its supply lines, miscalculated the cavalry, whatever. It was just physics to him.
But the biblical worldview looks at the exact same events and sees a deeper moral reality.
Exactly.
The Old Testament prophets constantly warned that God's judgment operates through these historical forces. The strong exploiting the weak isn't just a neutral law of nature, as the Athenians claimed at Melos.
No.
It is a profound moral violation of the universe God created. Think of Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. When human beings live as though there is no God, when they believe they can butcher the Malians and suffer no consequence, they are blinding themselves to reality. And that blindness inevitably leads them right into the stone quarries.
The clinical diagnosis of the elites is so clear here, but we have to look at the rest of society too.
Right.
What was happening to the ordinary people while the Niceses and Alcibiades of the world were playing their deadly games of geopolitical chess.
And this is where Aristophanes provides such a vital contrasting perspective.
He really does.
Aristophanes is putting on comedies right in the middle of all this trauma.
Which is hard to even wrap your head around.
Imagine the setting. It's the theater of Dionysus, carved right into the southern slope of the Acropolis. You have thousands of Athenian citizens packed into these stone benches.
The exact same men who vote in the assembly.
Yes, the same men who will put on armor and fight the Spartans. They are traumatized, they are grieving lost sons, they are tired of rationing food. And Aristophanes writes plays that are so absurd, so obscene, and so biting that they offer a completely different kind of diagnosis.
Because Thucydides analyzes the failure of peace from inside the rational power politics framework. He shows reason failing.
Right.
But Aristophanes satirizes the situation from outside that framework. He basically says your entire premise is absurd. He highlights the insanity of the institutions themselves.
We see this in three major plays, right?
Yes. First, you have the Atarnians, which was staged in 425 BC. The main character is a humble farmer named Dicaeopolis.
Okay.
He is so sick of the politicians delaying peace talks that he uses his own money to negotiate a private, magical peace treaty with Sparta just for himself and his family.
The visual of that on stage must be hilarious.
Oh, it is. The rest of Athens is under siege, and Dicaeopolis has this little magical force field around his house where he is enjoying imported wine, fresh eels, and throwing parties.
Aristophanes is parodying the warmongering demagogues, showing that the war is destroying the demos, the common people, while the politicians get rich off the war effort.
Exactly. Then you have the play Peace, which was staged in 421 BC.
The exact same year the Peace of Nicias was signed.
Right. And Aristophanes captures the fragile hope of that moment perfectly, but he wraps it in absolute absurdity. A character decides he has to fly to Mount Olympus to complain to Zeus about the war.
Naturally.
But instead of a majestic flying horse like Pegasus, he rides a giant gluttonous dung beetle.
Which is just a brilliant piece of stagecraft and, scatological humor.
Very much so. And when he gets to heaven, he finds that the gods have abandoned Greece in total disgust. A terrifying giant named War has actually imprisoned the beautiful goddess Peace in a deep cave and is literally grinding the Greek cities to a pulp in a giant mortar and pestle.
Wow, that's dark.
It is. So the hero organizes a massive team of farmers from all over Greece to physically haul the goddess Peace out of the cave with ropes.
It's utopian wish fulfillment.
Yes. It celebrates the idea of peace, but by relying on a dung beetle and a magical rescue, Aristophanes is quietly acknowledging how fragile and unlikely the real-world Peace of Nicias actually is.
And finally, you have Lysistrata.
Yes, written in 411 BC.
So this is right after the Sicilian catastrophe. Athens is reeling. The empire is collapsing. And Aristophanes writes a play where the women of Athens and Sparta, led by Lysistrata, decide they're going to force the men to make peace by launching a coordinated sex strike.
It's famous for a reason.
They seize the Acropolis. They lock up the treasury so the men can't fund the navy. And they basically refuse to sleep with their husbands until a treaty is signed.
It is a brilliant inversion of power. I mean, in ancient Athens, women had zero political voice.
None.
So by making them the agents of salvation, Aristophanes is exposing the utter bankruptcy of male political leadership. The men have been so blinded by their toxic ambition and pride that it takes the most disenfranchised group in society to point out the obvious. The war is destroying everyone.
But I have to ask the critical question here.
Yeah.
The Theater of Dionysus holds over 10,000 people, right? These plays were massively popular. Aristophanes won prizes for them. The whole city's packing into the amphitheater, roaring with laughter at how absurd and corrupt the politicians are. But then those exact same citizens wake up the next morning, walk over to the Phoenix Hill for the assembly, and vote to launch the Sicilian expedition.
Right.
So how does that psychology work? If the satire was so cutting, why didn't it actually change anything?
That is the tragic limitation of satire. Comedy, especially in a dying political system, it often functions as a form of communal lament. The audience didn't laugh because they thought a dung beetle could save them or because they thought a sex strike was a viable political strategy. They laughed because they knew it was utterly impossible. The fantasy of a private peace treaty is devastating, precisely because the real world offered absolutely no escape.
So the laughter was just a release valve, not a catalyst for change.
Yes. They were morally exhausted. They could clearly see the gap between the noble rhetoric of their leaders and the brutal reality of their own suffering. They knew Alcibiades was a corrupt megalomaniac.
But they felt powerless.
Entirely powerless to stop the machine of war. The momentum of the empire was just too great. So they compartmentalized, they laughed at the absurdity at night, and they submitted to the tyranny of the mob in the morning.
That is deeply convicting, because we see that exact dynamic in modern institutional failures today.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about massive corporate scandals or political dysfunction or even abuse crises within large church organizations. Everyone sees the hypocrisy. Everyone makes cynical jokes around the water cooler. We generate endless memes satirizing the leadership. But nothing changes because the system feels too massive to fight. The Nicias are too cowardly, the Alcibiades are too entrenched, and the common people are just trying to survive. Aristophanes really forces us to look past the elite generals and see the farmers, the wives, the ordinary citizens whose lives are ground to dust by the ambitions of powerful men.
And this transition is crucial because this is where the Greek genius hits a massive brick wall.
Yeah.
Thucydides perfectly mapped the structural rot of human ambition. Aristophanes brilliantly captured the emotional exhaustion of the masses, but neither of them had a cure.
No.
Thucydides says, this is just human nature, get used to it. Aristophanes says, it's all a joke, let's just drink. It is an incredibly bleak dead end.
But centuries before Athens and Sparta even existed, the Hebrew prophets were looking at the exact same human disease. And unlike the Greeks, the prophets actually provided the divine diagnosis and pointed toward the cure.
Yes.
Let's dive into the Old Testament framework of peace. The ancient world had treaties long before 421 BC. If you look at the ancient Near East, specifically the Hittite treaties from the 14th and 13th centuries BC, they followed a very specific format.
They did. Two kings would negotiate a vassal treaty, and the final, most crucial section was always a list of divine witnesses.
Right.
They would invoke a pantheon of gods to violently curse whoever broke the treaty.
Because the underlying assumption was that human words are inherently untrustworthy.
Yeah.
You needed a divine enforcer to guarantee the peace.
Exactly. But the Peace of Nicias was completely secularized. Thucydides was notoriously skeptical of oracles and divine intervention. The Athenians and Spartans swore oaths, sure, but the treaty rested entirely on the shifting sands of human self-interest.
And the Old Testament prophets understood exactly why a peace built only on human self-interest will always collapse. They constantly warned Israel about the deadly illusion of false peace.
They did.
Listen to Jeremiah 6.13-15. God is indicting the religious and political leadership of Jerusalem. He says, from the least to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for unjust gain, and from prophet to priest, everyone deals falsely. They have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Were they ashamed when they committed abomination? No, they were not at all ashamed. They did not know how to blush.
Peace, peace, when there is no peace. That is literally the most accurate summary of the Peace of Nicias ever written.
Is it?
They had the parchment, they had the handshakes, they had the defensive alliance on paper, but there was no actual peace because the underlying greed for unjust gain hadn't changed a bit.
And the linguistic parallels here are just stunning. We talked about Thucydides using the imperfective aspect for ongoing arrogance and the perfect aspect for total destruction. The Hebrew text of Jeremiah operates with a remarkably similar grammatical precision.
How so?
When Jeremiah talks about the leaders being greedy for unjust gain, the Hebrew uses active participles. That implies a continuous, habitual state of exploitation. It's an ongoing hustle. But when he asks if they were ashamed and says they did not know how to blush, the verbs shift to the perfect tense.
Yeah.
It's a settled, completed state of moral deadness. They have permanently lost the capacity for shame.
Wow. It perfectly maps onto Alcibiades and the Spartan Air Force. They signed treaties they fully intended to break, and they didn't lose a moment of sleep over it. The prophet Isaiah diagnoses the exact same structural flaw in Isaiah 59.
What does he say?
He says, "Their feet run to evil, and they are swift to shed innocent blood. The way of peace they do not know, and there is no justice in their paths." The prophets aren't just critiquing a flawed geopolitical strategy. They are exposing a spiritual terminal illness. You see it again in Ezekiel 34, where God condemns the leaders of Israel as exploitative shepherds who feed themselves by slaughtering the flock.
So what does this all mean? We have to define what true peace actually is in the biblical worldview.
Yeah.
Because the Hebrew word shalom is so much more profound than the Greek concept of spondo, which is basically a mere truce or armistice.
This is a critical distinction. A truce, like the Peace of Nicias, is merely the absence of open warfare. It is a pause in the violence so both sides can sharpen their swords.
Right.
But shalom means completeness, wholeness, comprehensive flourishing. It means the relationships between God, humanity, and creation are rightly ordered. You cannot have the political reality of shalom without the spiritual reality of justice, righteousness, and repentance.
A society built on exploiting the weak, like the Spartan Helot system or the Athenian Empire, is structurally incapable of shalom, no matter how many treaties they sign.
Exactly.
I think of it like buying a house with a fundamentally compromised foundation.
Mm-hmm.
The walls are cracking, the floor is sagging. Athens and Sparta essentially tried to fix the house by slapping a fresh coat of paint on the walls and calling it a 50-year peace.
Mm-hmm.
But the foundation of their society was ravenous, unchecked ambition. The paint is going to crack. The house is going to collapse.
Inevitable.
And this is a moment for us to really hold the mirror up to ourselves, because it is incredibly easy to judge Alcibiades and Nicias. But where in our own lives are we settling for a superficial, painted-over truce rather than doing the excruciatingly hard work of seeking true shalom?
That's the real question.
Maybe it's a deep conflict in your marriage that you just don't talk about anymore. A Cold War where you are just politely avoiding each other. Maybe it's a rift with a family member where you shake hands at Thanksgiving but secretly harbor deep resentment.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a secret sin you've negotiated a ceasefire with. You aren't repenting. You're just managing the optics. We say peace, lightly, to avoid the pain of real transformation.
And that pain is exactly where the New Testament takes us.
Yeah.
If the Old Testament prophets expose the crumbling foundation of society, the New Testament takes a scalpel directly to the individual human heart. It explains the cellular mechanism of why the foundation is crumbling. We have to look at the Epistle of James.
James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. This is incredible. If Thucydides gives us the X-ray of the empire, James gives us the MRI of the soul.
Yes.
He writes, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you?
Yeah.
You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel."
The precision of James's vocabulary is just astounding. The Greek word he uses for passions or desires is epithumia.
Epithumia.
It doesn't just mean a passing wish. It means an intense, overpowering craving, a lust for more.
Mm-hmm.
And James uses literal military vocabulary to describe what this craving does inside of us. He uses the verb stratuestai, which means to wage war, to be on a military campaign.
Wow.
He is saying there is a literal violent civil war being waged inside your own desires long before you ever get into a conflict with someone else.
This is the Rosetta Stone for the entire Peloponnesian War. Why did the Peace of Nicias fail? Why did Athens launch the suicidal Sicilian expedition? Because of what the Greeks called pleonexia, the insatiable greed to have more than your fair share.
Yes.
Alcibiades' thirst for glory, the Athenian Assembly's lust for imperial wealth, Sparta's paranoid desire for control. These weren't just bad political algorithms, they were spiritual pathologies.
Exactly. The debates in the Athenian Assembly, the fleets sailing across the Aegean, the men dying of thirst in the stone quarries of Syracuse, All of that massive historical carnage was simply the externalization of the unseen war that was already raging within the human soul.
It starts inside.
Always. The Apostle Paul affirms this universally in Romans 3. He strings together a series of Old Testament quotes to indict all of humanity, concluding with, "And the way of peace they have not known." Humanity, apart from the grace of God, is structurally, psychologically, and spiritually incapable of generating lasting peace.
And the early church fathers understood this connection between the internal war and the external wars perfectly. Think about St. Augustine.
Oh, City of God.
Right. He wrote his massive masterwork, The City of God, as the Roman Empire was literally collapsing. And he looked back at all of human history, including the Greeks, and he diagnosed the root issue. He argued that the earthly city is constituted entirely by the love of self, even to the point of contempt for God. Therefore, any peace the earthly city achieves is merely a provisional cessation of conflict.
Augustine saw right through the illusion. A peace based on the love of self will always, eventually, be sacrificed on the altar of self-interest when it becomes advantageous to do so. John Chrysostom, the great preacher of Antioch, made the exact same point when preaching on the book of James. He noted that the wars that tear nations apart arise from the exact same internal disorder of desire that tears apart a local church congregation or destroys a marriage.
The scale is different, but the root disease is identical.
Exactly. The only cure is a fundamental reordering of our desires toward the love of God.
So if we trace this all the way down, Thucydides was brilliantly right that human nature is consistent. He accurately observed that people under pressure will revert to self-interest, fear, and power grabs. But his fatal flaw was accepting that as an unchangeable law of the universe. The Athenians at Melos thought the strong must exploit the weak, like water flowing downhill. But James steps into the room and says, no, you aren't bound by a law of physics. You are bound by your own sin. You are a slave to your epithumia.
It is a profound paradigm shift. Thucydides operates in a purely immanent closed-loop framework. He looks at the sickness, shrugs, and says, this is just what it means to be human. But the biblical worldview looks at the exact same sickness and says, no, this is what it means to be fallen, and fallenness can be redeemed. When you feel those internal wars, the burning ambition to climb the corporate ladder at the expense of a colleague, the absolute prideful need to win an argument with your spouse.
The desire to dominate a situation.
Yes, you have to recognize what that is. Yeah. That spark of pride is the exact same raw material that built the stone quarries of Syracuse.
Which brings us to the ultimate climax of our deep dive. If human treaties are doomed by self-interest, and if our own hearts are internally at war, constantly sabotaging our own peace, how do we ever find it?
Yeah.
Thucydides leaves us shivering in the dark quarries. Aristophanes leaves us laughing in the dark, masking our despair. But the gospel does not leave us in the dark. It gives us the dawn. We look to the one who accomplishes what thousands of years of human philosophy and politics could not.
We look to the words of Jesus Christ in the upper room, hours before his crucifixion. John 14:27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you.
Not as the world gives. How does the world give peace? The world gives the Peace of Nicias.
A negotiated settlement.
A compromise based on mutual exhaustion and fragile self-interest. It lasts exactly as long as it is useful to the people holding the weapons.
But the peace of Christ operates on an entirely different mechanism. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 2 that Christ himself is our peace. He has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. The peace Christ gives is not a negotiated treaty. It is an accomplished substitutionary redemption.
Think about the contrast between Alcibiades and Jesus.
Oh, that's power.
Alcibiades is the ultimate worldly savior. He is strong, charismatic, and powerful. But he gladly sacrificed the weak. He sent thousands of Athenians to die in Sicily, all to secure his own personal glory and power. Jesus Christ is the ultimate anti-Alcibiades. He's the strongest being in the universe, the King of Kings. Yet he intentionally becomes weak. He doesn't sacrifice his followers to save himself. He goes to the cross, absorbs the full devastating consequence of human hostility and divine justice, and gives away his life to save his enemies.
The sheer scandalous grace of that is staggering when you hold it up against the backdrop of the Peloponnesian War. The Greeks couldn't conceive of a god who would willingly give up power to secure peace. To them, gods ruled by force.
Right.
But because Christ secured this peace through his own blood, through his own sacrifice, it cannot be undone by a shifting political alliance. It doesn't rely on our perfect compliance. It is eternal. And this is why Paul can confidently command believers in Colossians 3:15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts.
But notice that word, rule. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts.
Yeah.
That implies a total transfer of authority. It requires the work of the Holy Spirit.
It does.
You can't just sign a personal Peace of Nicias with God. You can't say, okay, God, I'll give you Sunday mornings, and I'll drop some money in the offering plate, but I retain control over my career ambitions and my private internet history.
That is a conditional truce.
It's a paper peace you secretly plan to break the moment temptation hits. What the gospel demands and what the Holy Spirit provides is a complete heart transplant. He rips out the heart governed by warring passions, by epithumia, and implants a new heart where the peace of Christ sits on the throne.
And this is how theology equips us for daily life. Thucydides looks at the stone quarries and says, look at the tragic inevitability of human failure. He can diagnose the rot perfectly, but he can't save the patient. The gospel tells us that the quarries are real. The suffering caused by human sin, pride, and war is devastatingly real, but the quarries are not the end of the story.
The quarries are not the end of the story. When we look at the catastrophic failure of human leaders, when we look at the failures within our own deceitful hearts, we do not have to despair. We don't have to retreat into cynical mockery like Aristophanes. We can look to the cross.
Understanding this history should inspire in us a profoundly deeper love for Christ. When you realize that he has freely provided the exact enduring peace that 2,400 years of human genius, political science, military might, and philosophy could never achieve.
The combined intellect of Athens could not manufacture the shalom that Jesus hands to a repentant sinner.
Amen.
Let's bring all these threads together. We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at the doomed ink on the Peace of Nicias in 421 BC. We watched a perfectly drafted treaty fall apart because leaders like Alcibiades couldn't control their ravenous ambition, and leaders like Nicias lacked the moral courage to stop them. We analyzed this through the cold, clinical realism of Thucydides, who showed us the tragic mechanics of power. We felt the desperate, satiric comedy of Aristophanes, showing us a populace laughing to keep from crying.
Right.
We let the Old Testament prophets expose the crumbling foundation of any peace built without justice. We let the Apostle James perform MRI surgery on our own hearts, revealing the internal war of desires. And finally, we arrived at the true, enduring shalom, purchased by the blood of Jesus Christ.
It is a remarkable journey. It really proves that ancient history isn't just a collection of dusty dates and distant battles. It is a vivid mirror reflecting our own urgent spiritual need.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to carry with you. Centuries after the Greeks destroyed themselves, the Romans conquered the known world and proudly declared the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome.
Ah, yes.
They claimed they had finally solved the puzzle, they had brought peace to the earth. But how did they maintain it? By executing dissidents on crosses along the highways, by ruling through absolute terror. The ultimate human peace was just violence perfectly managed. And it was exactly during that Pax Romana, that perfectly managed violence, that God incarnate stepped into history to be crushed by it in order to defeat it forever. So look at your own life today. Look at your relationships, your career, your internal struggles. Are you trying to establish your own Pax Romana, keeping your life under control through sheer force of will, anxiety, and managed conflict? Or will you surrender your internal wars to the Prince of Peace, allowing his spirit to completely rule and heal your heart? The muddy waters of our world don't clear up by staring at them harder. They only clear up when we let the great physician heal the wound. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking true peace.